Greetings and welcome to Binding. I'm Andriy Alyokhin, and today we're at the Shevchenko Central Children's Library in Kyiv. There are plenty of books like this in the library. These are not all of them. I just wouldn't be able to carry them all. These are books by Kuzka Kuzyakin. There is a Kuzka Kuzyakin who wrote a lot of books for children, and I'm going to introduce you to him. Don't tell anyone, but it's the famous children's writer and illustrator Dmytro Kuzmenko. Let's go. So, Dmytro, anyone can kiss the princess, right? Even me? Well, of course. I'm going to look for a princess then. Tell me about yourself. If we take a look at your biography, it seems as though the person who wrote it was searching for his vocation: art, teaching journalism, then nuclear physics in some Polish university. Something like that. And then suddenly this man is a children's writer, an illustrator who draws these princesses and writes books about them. So how did it happen that such a serious and respected man quit studying physics and began writing books? Yes, here is how I would put it. How did it happen that such a non-serious man came to the point of studying physics? Because I never really wanted to be a physicist. I just liked physics, loved maths at school. And it so happened that I enrolled in a physics and maths faculty after school. I haven't managed to graduate, but it was just… I can't say it wasn't interesting for me, it was just as interesting. But the thing is that there are plenty of truly interesting things, which can sometimes be really captivating. And that's why you wonder why you spent your time on certain things. And if you've already wasted it, you wonder, what am I going to do next with it? I understand. But listen, no one guarantees that you won't discover the talent of, say, singing 3 or 5 years down the line. And then you'll be singing… Nobody knows what lies ahead for us. Maybe you haven't found your calling yet. Well, I can say that I already have. This actually is my calling, and I always knew about it. I was just otherwise occupied. And I hope that I will get to do something else besides this. Because trying something new, developing and moving forward is actually lots of fun. Well, okay, here's another question. You're a children's writer, and children's writers are often fairly respected people who sit down in front of kids and say, "Okay, children, listen to what I have to tell you." But you're completely different. You are the pirate Kuzka Kuzyakin who does such things on the pages of his books that sometimes I want to lock him up in a cell for juvenile delinquents. He's quite a hooligan. So how did this character appear? Are you like Kuzka Kuzyakin? I mean, in real life? He's the kind of character because that's what I myself like. I think I enjoyed reading stories like this more when I was a kid. I never liked those boring and overly proper things. Even now, when I pick up a children's or adult book… Yes, especially classic Ukrainian children's literature. They read Marusia to us, where they were crying all the time and working as serfs, where they were all sad. Then they returned home and cried again. After they were done crying, they went to sleep, and in the morning they started crying again. So this literature is quite… At least that's how it was presented to us in Soviet society. All Ukrainian literature is about serfdom. It's horrifying. As for children's literature, I had Vitya Maleyev at school, and at home, Neznayka on the Moon, Denis Koroblov, whoever that was, and that's it. And now there's so much children's literature that I sometimes regret on being a child and being unable to read it all. So here's the next question. Weren't you afraid of getting lost in a sea of children's writers? On Binding alone, we've had like 50 of them. Children's literature is extremely popular in Ukraine right now. And you're just one of the children's writers. So how do you find your, not niche, that would be inappropriate, but your image, your books that children will chase across libraries and bookstores? Well, you know, I would generalize here. There are a lot of children's writers and adult writers, as well as books. Even I write books. There's an incredible amount of books. The world is changing, but we're used to thinking in categories that writers, of whom there were dozens, were well known. They could be in the middle of nowhere or might already be dead. And if they were alive, you were unlikely to meet them somewhere. Now there are a lot of writers, just like there's a lot of everything else. Information is expanding and spreading. The world is also expanding. So if you chase everything, you won't succeed in anything. So setting a goal such as becoming the second modern, you won't have time for it all. That's true. Panas Mirny, or I doubt that it's a realistic goal today. There's more competition, you just have to be yourself and do what you like and what you enjoy. Then your work will find its audience. It does not necessarily have to be hundreds of thousands or millions of people. If there's a circle that reads your books and wants them, then it's worth continuing your work. And if nobody at all wants your books, then
то варто далі це робити. Якщо воно, звичайно, нікому не потрібно, то... Коротше, секрет...
In short, the secret of a writer's success is that if you really enjoy your work, people will see it and buy your books. You know, there is a theory that a writer needs to have balls of steel. You must sit down and write every day, whether you want to or not, and regardless of whether you are inspired or not. Not a single day without writing at least a line, like Soviet poetry to some extent. In your opinion, if you signed a contract with a publisher and have to submit a book, but you have zero inspiration, what do you do? You know, writers who write at least 10 pages a day are great. I take my hat off to them. They're true professionals. They know that they need to write, so they sit down and write. I respect that. Unfortunately, I'm not one of them. I'm the kind of writer who needs to feel that he has already come up with the text, that it is bursting to get out. Or I can, well, I feel that it's already there, and if it's not bursting to get out, then I need to sit down and pull it out myself.
Насправді дуже багато батьків знають, як важко змусити дитину не просто читати книжки.
Actually, a lot of parents know how important it is to make children not just read books, but also do school homework and enjoy it. Today's guest wrote some of his books specifically for such parents and kids. So, Dmytro, I remember my childhood. Maths assignments were usually as follows. A collective farmer went to a market and bought 2 cows for a collective farm and 1 for a state farm. If 1 cow produces 4 liters of milk. In short, I didn't care how much milk a collective farm cow gave. And it was a torture for children to count how many kilograms of potatoes. Or the famous water is pouring into a pool from one pipe and out of it through another pipe in this never-ending cycle. You can spend all day calculating that. So the task here is to teach children not only to read, but to study maths and solve problems. You were a mathematician at some point, then a writer and illustrator. How did it all come together in the famous problems of Kuzka Kuzyakin?
Просто хочеться, щоб діти розвивалися, звичайно. Щоб вони читали теж. Читали бажано ще щось, що їх розвиватиме, тоді можна читати просто собі.
I just want children to develop. I want them to read something that would develop them. So I had this idea that I worked for a magazine and was writing maths puzzles for it. So it was then that I came up with the idea of writing a book for them. I saw how well they did. And then I saw that there were kids who actually wanted to learn something new, whose desire for that hadn't been killed off yet. And that's exactly what they want. So then I had an idea of how and what to give them so they could learn, to make studying a game, an adventure. For example, if I recall my childhood, studying very often turned into an adventure for me. Too bad it wasn't always that way. So if you have this desire for adventures and learning because you're learning something that has been long known for everyone else, solving problems that everyone else has long solved. But you're learning it all for the first time, and until you walk this path of knowledge yourself, until you discover Newton's law and prove it to yourself, you won't know it. You can read about it, but you haven't experienced it yourself. You need to experience this discovery yourself. The same with this approach. I began thinking about how to shape it all. For example, for the difficult tasks, I had a pirate. An imaginary pirate who didn't like elephants because an elephant had stepped on his ear when he was a kid, and he did not become a musician because of that. All this creates a story that is not particularly important, just like those adventures, but the problems. These problems have been solved a million times. But they're more interesting this way. They're written with humor, so they're simply more interesting. Even though these problems are nothing new, they've been the same for so many years. We need to develop them. You mentioned the pool, for example. It's important to know how to solve this problem because it's a necessary thing. But it can be worded through something different. Like, for example, 2 flies that drowned in this pool. That'll already be a bit more fun. Maybe, I don't know, I've never drowned. What I want to say is that I remember, for example, when our physics teacher asked us about Newton's third law. I still don't know it. Frankly, I don't remember the first one either. Maybe because I didn't personally experience it. I remember the law where water pushes something out. That I can do. The law of Archimedes. Yes, the law of Archimedes. You take a ball, put it in water, and the water... I kind of understand that. As for the laws of Newton, well, of course, an apple fell on his head. That's personal experience. But there was nothing else like that. Chemistry, for example. All those organic things, this valency, I learned it all, I knew it all. I had a solid B in chemistry. But when it comes to defining valency, I have no idea what that is. So here's a question from a man who still doesn't know what valency is, and what inertia and friction are. The force of friction is an empty phrase for me. Would you like to write books with physics and chemistry puzzles? Or biology, or something about the vacuoles, or what have you. Something like that. Parents would be grateful, because the life of parents whose child is studying at school is a life of universal struggle with school textbooks, which the child has to learn from. Then the child sits down, gets tired and says, I want to go out and play or something. Can we expect more books from Kuzka Kuzyakin that will help children make sense of the school curriculum?
Я дуже сподіваюся, тут просто насправді таке питання, що треба бути ще кваліфікованим в тому, про що пишеш.
I really hope so. There is also this issue that you must be competent in what you're writing about. What did you say about chemistry or biology? If it works out with those who knows these topics. And here's what I'm going to say about physics. You just mentioned the apple that falls on someone's head. I'll tell you how it is going to be very interesting. The apple is not the point. Why was Newton a genius? Not because an apple fell on him and he discovered this law. It was because he'd been thinking about how the moon interacts with the earth and with us when the apple fell on him. Something like that. About how it remains in the sky. And then the apple fell on his head. So what's his brilliant idea? The idea that the moon is constantly falling towards Earth, just like this apple. Now I don't understand a thing. In short, keep writing. You can even write the physics book for dumb men who still don't understand how our world works. In addition to all his occupations, physics, journalism, maths, and many others, Dmytro Kuzmenko was also an editor of children's magazines like Piznaika and the like. No one knows better where modern children's literature is heading now than him. I believe that all these trends are wonderful and we need them. But if a writer works on them just because they're popular, they end up with something second-rate. No one is interested in it and it stays afloat for 6 months or a year at most, until talk around it dies down. It won't go any further. And I personally think that it's a shame that such empty things get promoted. Well, this is a market. This is commerce. You can't get away from that. Emptiness is very easy to promote. When you read it, you immediately realize that the writer is not yet ready for this topic. That he's not yet ready to write anything at all. I'd like to say that your child is lucky because he has your books. We've had children's writers who honestly said that they had started writing children's books specifically because they could not find any decent books for their kids. So they sat down and wrote those books themselves. And then people started buying them. As for yourself, you can always write for your son. Do your children ask you to write books for them? Dad, write a book for me. My son is just 3, and I write books for elementary and high school. I haven't read any of my books to him. I only recently told him that I'm a writer. He has no idea yet what this is. We read slightly different books to him. Fortunately, he likes listening to them so far. Books are still a kind of adventure for him. That's how it is so far. By the way, I know you're the initiator of reading out loud, a tradition that Liszt had on our lands back in the day, when there was one literate person in a whole village who read some hymnals or books about the lives of these saints aloud. No one reads aloud for children now. Well, there are audiobooks, so you can subscribe if you really want to, and some stranger will read to your children, and you read aloud, and you know that you're involving parents in this. Dad reads one chapter, then mom reads another chapter, and the kids sit there and say, "That's my dad reading aloud right now." So, is this tradition successful, or is it an experiment just to show that this is also a thing people can do?
Ми її наразі тільки започаткували. Мета її, щоб згуртувати батьків, які хочуть разом з книжкою, разом...
We've only just started. The goal of all this is to unite those parents who want to spend their time with their children and books. Because we live our lives spending time on whatever. While it would be better to spend time with your family, with the people you love, to spend time on bringing up your kids.
Він так швидко спливає, його забуваєш потім.
Time flies so fast that you forget what your baby looked like before. It's unbelievable how fast time passes. And you can spend this time together with a book to delay it just a little bit, so that both you and your kids can have fun. I got it. You see these emotions, this communication not at some McDonald's, but here. And I'd like parents to be close, so it'd be interesting for you to spend time both with your family and other families. You know, this inspires me so much that I also want to have a child. And you know what I'll tell you? Keep writing new stuff. Let Kuzka Kuzyakin write without stopping, and promise to visit us again. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'll try to continue writing.